De volta, então. Podemos
Okay,
começar
so
quando quiser.
let's start then. So first of all, welcome all of you to this seminar. So the topic of today is quite broad. I mean, it can be applied in any area of research in our center. So it's about agent-based modeling and simulation. It's a very important topic. And so I have the pleasure to introduce the speaker for today. That is Nuno Fachada. So Nuno Fachada is still a young researcher. He finished his PhD in 2016 in IST in topics related to the subject that he's going to talk today. And currently he is professor at Lusófona University and also researcher at the COPELABS Research Center. So after the presentation by Nuno, we'll have, as usual, a period for discussion. And this period will be moderated by our colleague, Luis Brito Palma. So, Nuno, you can start.
Okay, so we'll share my screen. Okay, so let's start. So thank you, Luis, for the introduction. So I will talk about agent-based modeling and simulation. So I will first give a little bit of context on my current research on, or status of my research on agent-based modeling and simulation. This topic is one of several topics in which I'm interested in which I work. Actually, I'm not working in research in this topic since 2017. However, I would like to return to this topic as soon as I have the possibility and the context to do it. I also work in machine learning, statistics, and data science on meteoristic optimization, high performance computing, computer science education, AI in games, procedural content generation, and open research software. You might find these are a lot of topics that I work on, but every single one of these topics, actually, I became interested in starting from agent-based modeling. And throughout this presentation, I will show how all of these topics are related to agent-based modeling and simulation. Actually, except meteoristic optimization, which I'm not going to relate here specifically on this presentation. Well, this is just to give a little context. I'm not working currently on this, so let's move on. So first, a little introduction on what this is, agent-based modeling, or ABM for short, also known as individual-based modeling in biology and ecology areas. It's a bottom-up modeling approach where we model the individual heterogeneous elements of the system. These elements or agents often make independent decisions about what to do, and the global behavior of the system emerges from the local decisions and interactions between these agents. This kind of modeling is well suited for, in general, complex systems with many heterogeneous entities. Battlefield simulations, cellular biology. It's very widely used in ecology models, also in epidemiology models, which is currently an important topic, as you know, in crowd dynamics, traffic, for modeling financial markets, social networks, and so on. So ABM is a modeling simulation technique. So it is useful for everything that modeling and simulation in general is useful for. It can help us better understand the system being modeled. It has the advantage over high-scale modeling, for example, using differential equations, because we can try and understand how macro behaviors emerge from micro interactions, which is difficult or even impossible to do with system dynamics modeling. So in practice, this is a type of complex system modeling, since we are expecting that the system behavior emerges from these micro interactions between the agents. Like any modeling technique, the idea is that it can also help us to predict the future behavior of the system. For example, how a disease will spread, how fire will propagate, how crowds react to specific events in delimited spaces, or even unrelated things such as the yield quality of a bioreactor. So this was just a short introduction to what ABM is, what it is appropriate for, and what can it help us achieve. And so now I will discuss some bits of research I've been doing along the years related to this topic. So I will start with biological and ecological systems. I worked on this topic some years ago in two different aspects. First, in the simulation of the human immune system, we studied the mechanisms of immune memory, of bacterial infection, and later influenza's endogenic drift and shift. We did some interesting studies and papers about this. I ended up not continuing because there was a major difficulty in comparing the results of these models with actual data. We compared the results with qualitative data. Okay, so we could model the behavior of influenza, for example, and it was like qualitatively similar to what the textbook would show us. Okay, but this is mostly a fundamental research or academic pursuit. The next step would be to make these models useful. So because of the difficulty of finding good data at this time, I moved on. So I worked on this on my master, and then I moved on. I worked on IST also with some researchers on epidemiological modeling of dengue disease transmission. We also published several papers about this. We looked at different aspects of this issue. We first started by developing an artificial life model of the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is the vector that transmits dengue disease. Then modeling its population dynamics, and later on modeling the dengue transmission through these mosquitoes. Finally, our last paper about this was mitigation strategies, how we could sterilize mosquitoes most effectively. Actually, this is now currently being used. We got some nice citations about this work, even though it was just a conference paper. It's a pity that at the time we didn't continue with this, but the main researcher, I was his co-supervisor, the main researcher ended up going to the industry, so we didn't continue this work. So this was mostly done during my master and the maybe first year of my PhD. And for my PhD, things were going well at the beginning. I was supposed to have data finally, and that data was coming from another university, Nuno University, and it was data from bioreactor. So my goal in the PhD was initially to do an in silico modeling of the Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast in order to literally optimize the production of beer. So the idea was to uncover micro interactions between the biomass and the substrate types that we placed in the reactor, trying to predict the quality, try to use the computer to predict the quality of the produce of this bioreactor. This would be cheaper and faster than trying to experiment directly on the bioreactor, which takes many hours to generate something and need many trials to try and experiment with different substrates and biomasses in order to achieve a good quality product. So this was the initial plan for the PhD. It was actually integrated in a research project. open microbial research project. Unfortunately, the data came very late and was insufficient. So during my PhD, while I was waiting for the data, I started doing other things that I will talk in a minute. But when the data came, I still was able to use it, not for an ABM research, but for parallel research for basically unsupervised machine learning for trying to automatically differentiate between yeast strains. So the data was used, but the work was not used directly in my PhD. So what did I do in my PhD then? I focused on fundamental ABM research. So I didn't have any data, but I didn't want to try and model things that I can then compare to actual systems. So I went a bit lower level and started thinking about more theoretical and academic aspects of ABM in general. So we started doing this. Of course, this is the story of this is not as tidy as I'm presenting you here, but it was the final story that we produced. So basically, the first chapter, let's call it, of this story was the development of the standard model for ABM research. There are not many in the literature. There are many well-known models, but there are no models or very few models that are actually well defined. Okay, the problem with these models mostly is that you have some not very specific descriptions of what the agents do. Oh, this agent does that, communicates with that, and if it's energy very high, and so on. So what we did was we formalized a proper model so we could test aspects of this standard model or theoretical model, aspects such as the parallelization of these models, because these models are very slow. So parallelization is an important step for having results in proper time, and also to assess the reproducibility of these models. As we shall see, these models are often unreproducible. They are poorly defined. Some researchers program some things, put some things, some assumptions, and so on. Oh, here's our model, here's our results. And then you want to reproduce, you want to assess, you want to replicate the model, and you can't. Okay, so the first part of this story was to find or to implement a very well-defined model. So this model was based on well-studied predator-prey dynamics. So the predator-prey dynamics are very were discovered by Volt and Voltaire maybe more than 100 years ago using differential equations. So here we implemented this very old model using ABM, but in a very well-defined fashion, contrary to what was most common at the time. So we clearly defined the model. We created a canonical implementation in NetLogo. For those who don't know, NetLogo is a very simple to use ABM modeling tool in Java. It's actually fun. You could download it and test some example models that come with it. So it's very, very nice tool. A bit slow, but like in performance terms, but very nice. So we formalized this model and studied it to extreme detail using best practices. So we really got a hang of what this model produces, how it behaves, and so on. Later, we now that we have this very well-defined model, we investigated different parallelization strategies. So in general, we have two ways to parallelize an agent-based model. We can divide the environment, and each computer core simulates a part of the environment. This is called environment parallel parallelization. Sorry, environment parallel approach. Or we could send a bunch of agents, each bunch to a core, a CPU core. And this is called agent parallel the agent parallel approach. So both have advantages and disadvantages. Here, the communication occurs at the borders of the environment. Here, communication occurs on a proximity basis. So this standard model was first parallelized using 5 different environment parallel strategies in Java. The best of these strategies was up to 40 times faster than the canonical netlog implementation. This was on a 6-core 12-thread CPU at the time, 2015 more or less. Then the most efficient Java parallelization strategy was used for a C-OpenCL CPU implementation. For those who don't know, OpenCL is it's called it's an open compute protocol or language. You can run it on NVIDIA GPUs, on AMD GPUs, on Intel GPUs. It runs basically everywhere. Unfortunately, it's not as well supported in general as NVIDIA's CUDA, which is more well-known and more performant. But at least it's open source generally and can run in different hardware. So we did C-OpenCL implementation for the CPU using the best Java parallelization strategy. So we got results of up to 11 times faster than the Java implementation on a 10-core 20-thread CPU. So much, much faster, more than 100 times faster than the original netlog implementation. We found an interesting thing. We later implemented this model on the GPU using an agent parallel approach. So this one, okay. We tested it on NVIDIA's GPUs, on AMD GPUs, and the performance wasn't better than the C-OpenCL CPU implementation. You might think, okay, it wasn't better because you didn't optimize it well. Well, that's possible, but I think we really optimized this approach. But the thing is, GPU computation shouldn't have loops, shouldn't have ifs. It should run like in a massive parallel fashion. Okay, matrix and tensor multiplications for deep learning are a good example of things that run really well on the GPU. On things a bit more complex, like an agent-based model where each agent is basically its own entity, things are not so easy. And for allowing efficient communication, there is a sorting step. So we have to sort all the agents in the GPU, and even using very fast sorting, the state-of-the-art sorting algorithm for GPUs at the time, we couldn't get the GPU implementation to overcome this OpenCL CPU implementation. So this is an interesting result because everyone says, okay, GPUs are much, much faster than CPUs, and this might not be quite true. And I would say the work that the time that we lost implementing the GPU implementation was not trivial. So for having the same performance, I would suggest maybe don't go so low level to implement complicated or slightly more complex simulations in the GPU. Just use an efficient CPU approach, such as OpenCL, C, C++, or scientific languages such as Julia, which are also very, very efficient. Moving on, we found during this replications, during these parallelizations of models, that it's very difficult to replicate a model, to accurately replicate a model. And even more difficult if you try to parallelize it. Many researchers at the time we came to know, they looked at like the output of one model, the output of another model, of a parallelized one. Okay, this is looks similar, so probably all right. But if you go statistically compare the output in detail, you notice that re-implementations or the parallelized models are not producing the exact same results than the serial ones. And it's very, very easy when you change from a development environment to another, to change something, or even sometimes at the level of the programming language, to change something, then you have a different model and not the original replication of the original model. Some, but very few researchers actually did this statistical comparison, and they do it by selecting focal points on the simulation output and comparing those focal points on one model with the other. This was a laborious task because you have to look at the output, try and understand what are the most relevant focal points, the ones that may have most interest in a model. So it's very error prone, and each time you have a new model, you have to redo this exercise. So one of the things I did in my PhD was devise a generic technique for automatically comparing the different types of model output. I did this using PCA, which is a supervised learning technique, basically, or better yet, it's a dimensionality reduction technique that's more accurate, and together with statistical tests while verifying the assumptions for those tests. And then what this technique would offer us is a generic way to compare models, and the results it produced gives the researcher an immediate sense of whether the model was replicated. I have here a small table. This is for the standard model I discussed earlier. These are the 6 outputs of the model. Here we have a concatenated output. This A here is the concatenation of all outputs. Also, not just concatenated, but scaled, so the outputs are not on different magnitudes. So what we see here is the number of principal components for each output. If we apply the MANOVA statistical test, like this is for comparing the NetLogo and the Java implementation, and we can see that none of these p-values are significant. So we cannot reject the null hypothesis here that the models are the same. So contrary to common research here, we don't want to reject the null. So having these p-values or non-significant p-values is good. We can also apply the t-test to the first principal component, which we found it was actually very accurate, because the principal component, the first one, usually explained a lot of the variance from the PCA. So we often found that if the first principal component was statistically different between models, we found that, okay, we have the models are not producing the same results. Our technique also produced these scar plots, which you can visually look to see. You have black and red dots here. I don't know if you can distinguish in the video, but you can see here that models are producing similar results. Actually, I could have chosen a table where they are not producing similar results, so you could highlight, so you could understand better what I'm trying to highlight here. This technique we found it so useful. We produced an R package and then a MATLAB Octave package for automatically doing this. We have some citations on these papers about these packages, and people are using this approach for things that are not at all related with agent-based modeling. People are using this for comparing, for example, voxels in MRI scans to see if patients have different. Well, I'm not an expert, so I won't go into that. I just saw the abstract of the citing papers and so on. Anyway, it's interesting to see people using our packages. So currently, so this is basically the final part of my PhD. So since I moved to Lusofna, well, the first year I moved, research was stopped to a halt. I had to prepare a lot of classes. Then I started recovering. I'm on the recovery curve now. But I always try to, in my classes and to my students, to try to use the things I know to demonstrate what I want to teach. So for example, I'm currently using ABM in computer science class, basically programming classes and in artificial intelligence classes. First, you can do basic problems for students of programming to implement very simple models. So they see things moving, it's interesting for them. And then on the AI part, students can actually use AI algorithms, basic AI algorithms such as path finding and so on, to develop their simulations. So and if you think AI for computer games, because I teach, I don't think I said this, I teach in the video games degree in Lusófona, but if you think a little bit about this, AI for games techniques you have a great overlap with agent-based modeling techniques. So we have virtual simulated worlds, okay? We can have, for example, artificial life ecological models. You can ask students, okay, the final project is to implement this ecological model. It's good for them. They learn programming, they learn AI, and they learn about real stuff of the real world, which is important. We also did some works on crowd disaster scenarios. So I have some videos here. I'll just show them, maybe the crowds one first. So let me see. You can see, right, the video, I hope. Okay, so these students implemented so this is a concert, like Super Rock, Super Rock or something. You have here the stages. You have gardens like rest areas, green areas. You have here the paths. You see the students typically follow the paths, but not necessarily. You can see here there are, let's just go over the grass. And then they start these ones are hearing the music. There are some here that are eating. Some will rest. I will move forward. So we have some having fun in the concert. So like I said, this is a student project, and some eating, some on the grass. I will move forward because here the idea is not just to simulate the scenario, but to simulate the disaster in the scenario and to see how the public reacts. So there will be an explosion. So let me see when the explosion happens. So you see the behavior. Okay. So you have these ones are having the concert here. So there will be an explosion here on the left side. And then the agents will react to the explosion. Well, some of them die immediately, they disappear. Some of them are hurt, some of them are scared. The ones that are hurt, you can see them moving more slowly. And they are running for the exit. Some here don't understand what's happening. Some understand and start fleeing. Some are still having fun in the concert. These ones are very injured, so some can't even walk. Okay, it's what's happening here. Okay, there will be, I think, another explosion. Yeah, so that kills some more, and then here and here some more. So this kind of simulation is very interesting in a lot of ways. So it's interesting for actual research. Okay, if you want to model crowd behavior in this kind of scenario, and this is also a great exercise for our students. This was one of the best works, of course. I will not show you the worst ones, but in general, the students find these tasks very, very interesting. And sometimes it's difficult, especially in Lusófona, to motivate a student interest. So I will show you here another video of another project. So this is like an aquarium with different types of fish, and the smaller fish eat algae. These are the smaller ones, and you see the algae or the fish food hanging around in the aquarium. Then we put larger fish that eat the smaller one. We have 3 levels of fish, and you can see how the fish populations vary and what's like the extinction threshold of how much algae you need, how many fish of each type does the ecosystem support, and so on. So here you see this is a debugging option, is to see how the fish are seeing if and fleeing and capturing each other. So again, I will just move forward to see. This is like a help menu that the student did at the time. Okay, it's okay. I think it's enough to show what's the idea here. So unfortunately, nowadays my ABM works are somewhat limited to basic or not so basic, because these are interesting models with our bachelor students. So hopefully I will have in the future master and PhD students to do more serious stuff. Anyway, but just let me say, I'm still doing research, but because I'm in the games area now, I'm moving in several fronts, and I still haven't been able to also continue working on ABM. So if I continue working on ABM, if I have the opportunity to do so, there are some challenges which I would like to address. Continuing with the fundamental research aspects, there is an interesting and difficult issue, which is for us to have a high-level modeling and low-level parallel execution. So why high-level modeling? Who should develop the models? The experts should. I could develop a COVID model, a forest fire model, but I'm not an expert in this area. So the idea is to put these experts doing the models. And more or less, you can do that with tools such as NetLogo. But like I said, NetLogo is slow. We show that we can have more than 100 times improvement with the parallel implementation. So the idea is to put together a high-level modeling with low-level parallel execution. This is the holy grail of agent-based modeling. So it's an open research problem. For us to have models of realistic systems, real-world systems, we need to fine-tune or even develop new data fusion approaches. For example, I'm interested in fire spread models. If you want to develop such a model, you need different types of data. You need satellite data to update on the current status of the fire. And you need satellite data not just for pictures, for remote sensing of visual, but also of weather, of humidity, of wind, and of other factors which might influence how the fire spreads. Okay, so how do you put this data together? So there are a number of data fusion challenges ahead of us in order to pursue this with some efficiency. Another aspect is, okay, we can fine-tune our model by hand. That's usually how researchers do, but this is not practical. Nowadays, we have machine learning for something. So we should find or strive to find ways to have fast and accurate model learning and optimization techniques. Here is a bit where the meteoristic optimization part enters, which I think has some potential here, but not only, of course. So the idea would be, okay, the expert creates an approximate model, then we have this loop, this verification and validation loop in which machine learning can be used to optimize our model so our model better reflects the real system. And of course, still very important open problem is to embed reproducibility by design in these models. Most models, even today, 10 or 15 years after I started working on this topic, I see that many models are just ad hoc models that some experts or some computer scientists together with some experts define, and they run some simulation, check some results. I did this 10, 15 years ago, so I'm also guilty of this. But these models are not reproducible by design. So we still find this today, okay? This is, the problem is being solved. There are protocols for actually accurately defining such models, but it's still not standard today. Of course, this is the fundamental research aspects. In terms of practical models, there are many things we could and should model, and there are currently also models of this, agent-based models, like forest fires, land use, agriculture, and livestock models. I would like to highlight the livestock models, which may be also very important for optimizing milk and meat production, and to also account for the well-being of animals. I had preliminary talks about the project for this with some people at IST, but lack of time, we still haven't progressed. They have like these these models, internal models of animals with differential equations. So the idea would be to, okay, we use those equations to model the different animals, but then we put them in an environment together and see how they react, how they adapt, how they evolve, and how can we use such a model to optimize livestock management. So this is an idea only, and of course epidemiological models, especially of COVID-19. When the pandemic started, we had a student, a PhD student, which at the time was almost quitting the PhD, and then decided to move to this, and he did a model in 2 months, but then he disappeared, unfortunately. It was at the beginning of the pandemic, so it would be a good opportunity for publishing. Since then, we have seen many agent-based models of COVID, some better, some worse. Another important model, another important system or important aspect that I would like to investigate is the diffusion of fake news. We also have currently we have very strong models of this, mostly focused on graph models, so not particularly agent-based. But the idea here with the fake news and social networks would be to embed agent-based modeling in this to try and better define and discover why certain nodes in the graph are can so easily able to spread fake news while others can't, and so on. So one final aspect of this is related to stakeholders and funding. Models of real-world systems, as I so difficultly found out, require accurate and continuous stakeholder feedback. So the computer scientist will not do a fire model on itself, will not do influenza or COVID model by itself. It needs stakeholders, it needs partners of other disciplines to work with and to give him feedback, continuous feedback. This is one aspect. And of course, modeling simulation takes time, computer time, people time. So it needs people, needs computers, and in summary, needs funding. So maybe in the future, I don't know, because as you all well know, well, all is solved in work, but the idea would be to submit some project, some FCT or ERC project on these topics, on one of these topics. So this is all. Thank you. So any questions?
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Nuno Fachada, for your nice presentation. So now we have time for some questions from the audience. Please, if you have any question.
Maybe I can start with one.
Yes, please.
So, no, when you were discussing the difficulties with replication, the message or the feeling I got was that, okay, then these models are not trustable. So is this a limitation to use this approach, or didn't I understand it well?
I wouldn't say it's a limitation because any kind of model that you produce, you can say that it has this limitation. So it's like that old saying, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And here in agent-based modeling, it's exactly the same thing. The thing is with equation-based models, you have the equations. So to replicate, you just input the equations in another program. Maybe you can get, even that way, you can get different results. If you do something in C and then in Python, the accuracy of the floating point calculations might end up giving you different results. So at the very fundamental level, you have the problem of the different programming languages, different computers, different processors giving different results for the same calculation. Unless you strictly follow IEEE standards, this must be 64-bit, this 32, and so all the calculations are correct. But people often don't even think about these things. They just ask Python or whatever to do some calculation. Okay, so this is correct, probably. And we know, if you are in computer science, you know that's not quite true. So the limitation in agent-based modeling is no worse than limitation in other kinds of modeling. I would say you need to be more careful because with equations, you have the equations there. With more complex models, there are more moving parts, and you need to be much more careful when replicating. And these tools that I developed help people in that way, and to accurately replicate such models.
Okay. Yes, please, more questions. Please, Neja Silva.
Thank you, Nuno, for your presentation. Very interesting. I've been developing some master dissertations with my students in this topic, so the overall presentation you did was quite familiar to me. But while you were presenting, I was thinking about mixing two concepts. One of them, the one I've been studying quite a lot, which is the concept of digital twin. And I was imagining the possibility of mixing, of having the online replica of for instance, if in this case that you showed with the population inside the ring, the music concert, and all these people, and if you have a way to observe it and immediately extract the behavior of each element and represent it as an agent, and then having the possibility of fast forwarding the simulation and see what in which direction this the overall behavior is going to. See my point?
Okay, so I will address the last point, then you have to explain me the first a bit better, but the last point, regarding last point, these simulations that my students did, they can be fast forwarded because they are running at allegedly real time, but you can just go and change some parameter in the Unity game engine, which is where they developed this. Yeah. And you can just, you can even like disable visualization and frame update. So it will run at the maximum speed. With respect to the models and the simulations I did previously, they always ran at max speed. So you couldn't, I want to see how this is in 1,000 steps time in the future. So It's not a simple thing to do. There is an interesting aspect currently being developed each time more, which is to create meta models, because ABMs or agent-based models are slow inherently because you need a lot of computational power. What I've been observing lately, and I've reviewed some papers on that, is that people are using machine learning to understand how the model behaves. So they are creating meta models, models of a model. So if you have, like, for example, a neural network, if you create a neural network that learns how the model behaves, then you can run the network inference to get results much faster, and you can use the GPU and so on to get results almost immediately. So I think in theory, you could use like the agent-based model. And then if you have that meta model, you could, I want to skip 1 year. You could use the meta model to jump from where you stopped to where you want to go much faster. Of course, you will lose some precision, but at least it might give you the opportunity to do so. Maybe this is, I'm thinking this is something new. I don't know if this was done. So this is a research idea. With respect to the first thing that you asked, the digital twins, this is a recent term, which I find it just another word for, maybe I'm wrong because I maybe haven't researched it enough, but what I find is that this is just another word for a model. So you have the digital twin, and you run it along the real system to see how the results are going, and to see if the model accurately replicates the system. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not actually sure. But I know that there are currently digital twins implemented as agent-based models. So it's not at all surprising that you could mix the two approaches. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yes, somehow yes. What I was introducing here was the fact that each element in the real life would be represented virtually as an individual agent as well. So not the overall behavior of the population, but instance by instance.
Yeah, I think that's possible. But of course, this is depends on what you understand by individual. Okay, is it the person? If you have like a million persons, maybe you can model that. But if you have like 10 billion neurons or 100 billion cells, it's more difficult to do that. Okay, but so it depends on our perception on what we define as an individual.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so more questions, please. Okay, I have a question, one or two questions, but basically is about the application of principal component analysis that you use. Use typical, you can have a linear PCA or non-linear PCA. So use typically what kind of PCA? And this is one question. And another is, I think in the first line you have this is the number of principal components, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so it is, in your opinion, it is it's possible to try to reduce this number. So.
Let me just say, I didn't say that earlier. This is the number of components that explains like 90% of the variance.
Okay, 90%, yes.
So because the number of components is the same as the number of dimensions. So
yes,
this is just the ones that explain 90%.
Yeah. So this is the you choose in terms of the variance. In terms of
So you can reduce by reducing the variance, or you can just, like I said, often what I would observe is that the first PC had such a strong, by itself explained like 50% of the variance, and was often enough for us to understand if the models were yielding, the different models were yielding the same result or not. So that was interesting. Maybe even with just one PC, we often could differentiate or not the models. And the p-values, sometimes people, let me also add this, I didn't say this earlier. People often look sideways currently to p-values because they are often poorly used in statistics. In this approach, we don't define like a cutoff, like a 0.5 cutoff or 0.1 cutoff to define if it's statistically significant or not. We just present the p-values, and if you have like 1 or 2 or 3 p-values which are a bit low, below 0.5 or below 0.1, we observe that this sometimes happens by chance. So when a model is really different from another, we often see that there is a pattern of significant p-values, and you can also see in the score plots the clusters are a little bit more separated. So just adding to what I didn't say earlier.
Okay. So just one more question. You show a graphic with a fixture. I think it's fixture extraction. Yes. Yes. So, but in my opinion, this is in most of these kind of problems, this is a very big problem. So it is not easy, no? So what is your opinion about techniques for fixture extractions in your research? So, and in terms of optimization approaches, etc.
Okay, so that is easy because this is what I would like to do in the future. So I never did it, so I can't really say much about it. I know that this is how we do it. I'm not entirely within the currently in the current challenges that we have on feature extraction.
Okay.
Like a naive person on this, I would say, yes, I have my evolutionary algorithms, my machine learning techniques that help us try and do this on the most efficient way possible while getting proper simplifications of the real data.
Okay. Yes. So this is also some problems of big data.
Yes.
So it is a big challenge. Also.
Exactly. That's why the idea is to have a submitting projects so we can have manpower and computer power in order to be able to solve.
Yes, you need a lot of power. Okay. Thank you for your answers. So we have some more questions. Please, I think it was first Professor Camarini, please.
Considering the applied research areas that you mentioned as possible future, one of them was about the fake news. If I look at it from comparing to the other examples of the epidemiological models and so on, I can imagine that the same generic approach could be applied when you study the diffusion of the fake news. But are you aware of some works on how to use this simulation approach to study methods to prevent the fake news diffusion?
I am aware of studies on that, but not using an agent. Well, first, let me say, there is a difficult line dividing graph modeling and agent-based modeling, because sometimes, and this is what I was suggesting, agent-based modeling, you can like run the models on the Euclidean environment, 3D environment, or on a graph. So it just changes the topology of where the model is running. If we think on the most basic level, you only have the graph, and you have a lot of graph models, especially from people on MIT. I read a book, I can't remember the name of the author, it's a very well-known MIT professor. He wrote a book about the challenge of fake news. It's The Hype Machine. So the name of the book is The Hype Machine. I can't remember the name of the author. So While I didn't read the actual papers he wrote, I read the book, which is like a summary of his research. And it's a recent book, it's from 2021, I think, or late 2020. And from what I read, yeah, people are currently more focused in understanding the problem at hand. There are some experiments on trying to minimize the problem, but at the time, so this is like from state of the art of 1 year ago, at the time, you still don't have efficient ways of clamping down on fake news dispersion, unless maybe in China, but that kind of approach is not what we want to do here in democracies.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have also one more question. It's from Artem, please.
Good evening. First of all, thank you for your presentation. And my question is, it's about feature extraction. So, as you mentioned, the principal component analysis. And my question is, have you considered other approaches for the compare the performance of them, like, I don't know, the autoencoder, for instance?
So, okay, but this is related to feature extraction or for model comparison?
Let's feature extraction.
Okay, so like I said, feature extraction, I didn't use PCA, I didn't use anything because I didn't do this. This is feature work. So I can't really give much of an opinion on what would be the best strategies. However, let me steer your questions for the model comparison. I've thought of other ways of doing dimensionality reduction of simulation output to compare models. There were these researchers that used the Fourier transform some years ago. So they would analyze the model output in the frequency domain instead of the time domain, which it also helped them. It's a kind of dimensionality reduction, also helped them to compare models. And maybe, who knows, using autoencoders, you could do something similar. Also related with the meta modeling aspect I talked about earlier. But I don't know, these are interesting problems, open problems, and I can't really give you a straight answer, okay, at this time.
Thank you.
So please, more questions. Okay, I have one more question. Typically, when we talk about agents, we talk about software agents. But now we have like systems, hardware, software systems. So we can. Do you think that this concept of agent in the future will be like a hardware, software agent in terms because we have embedded systems, so you can have more systems with more powerful in terms of more and more processors, etc., or more distributed systems, also more parallel computing, not only concurrent programming, but in terms of parallel programming and parallel processing.
So that is an excellent question, and something that when I started in this area some years ago, it's something that I remember being confused about. We have two areas that somewhat overlap, but are different areas. Agent-based modeling and simulation is one thing. It's the thing I've been discussing today. And then you have what is called multi-agent systems, which is another thing. These multi-agent systems are in practice distributed, represented a kind of distributed computing, where the agents can represent the actual cars on the road, IoT devices on lamp lights, and all these kind of distributed nodes, either hardware or software or both, typically both, that you can have. And this area of study, this area of research is something, this is different. It's more implementational. Of course, you can simulate an eventual deployment of a multi-agent system using agent-based modeling. So it's actually perfect for it. You can simulate the actual distributed computing system using agent-based modeling on one computer. So that's the relation. But it's another problem. It's another area. I don't know if I was more or less clear.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. Please, more questions.
There was one question left from Marco Becco. He was not able to remain in the session, but he sent me a question. That is, if the model agent-based modeling can be used in telecommunications.
Yes, it is. This question is actually related with what I just said. In telecommunications, especially with the 3G, 4G, MIMO, and all that stuff, I'm not expert in telecommunications, but you can. What can you do with agent-based modeling? You can simulate these systems. It's curious that you ask me that because I have with a student at Lusofna, a PhD student. Actually, we submitted a paper recently of a model with just 3 agents, but running on it's a model in Python. You can call it an agent-based model because you have 3 agents. It's not much, but it is a model. It is an agent-based model. And we simulated a NOMA communication strategy using UAVs to deliver the signal. So we did that using a mix of agent-based modeling and equation modeling. So it's a direct application of agent-based modeling to a telecommunication system. Real telecommunication systems are in practice multi-agent systems, as I defined in the previous answer.
Okay. So more questions? So if you don't have more questions, I will give the floor to Professor Camarinha, please. And I would like also to thank again Nuno Fachada for this nice presentation.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Nuno, for the presentation, and also Luis Palma for this moderation. And I hope to see you soon again in another seminar. We don't have yet scheduled the next session. Nevertheless, we have a long list of topics to be presented in the next sessions, as you know. So as soon as we have the date for the next one, I will inform all of you. So thank you for coming, and have a good night.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Good, thank you.